A new character was emerging in the brand of Masters of the Universe classics, and he was a little unlike figures we'd seen in the past or in the future. Design elements that would be very much influenced by Japanese toys. Well, where did this action figure idea come from? Well, it was all part of the 30th anniversary line of Masters of the Universe classics, a subline of the online subscription program that was dedicated to bringing adult collector versions of He-Man and She-Ra characters to life in 6.5 inch form. And this subline was introducing brand new characters into the line that had never been there before. Now, why was this a way to celebrate the 30th anniversary of a line with new characters? Well, back in the day, back in the 80s, when Masters of the Universe was at retail, before the Filmation series, the only way to get to know new He-Man characters was to find them at retail, and you were introduced to them for the very first time as toys. So the idea was to recreate this very unique toy emotional connection with brand new characters for the 30th anniversary. Now, the original plan was to find some of the gentlemen who had worked on the original line in the 80s and have them create the characters. When they weren't available, the backup plan was to go to some well-known comic book writers and see if they would create new characters. And unfortunately, outside of Jeff Johns, that didn't really work. And as time is money, and money can be used for things like ivory back scratchers, upper management essentially said, okay, stop trying to find people to do this and just do it yourself. We don't have time to constantly track people down. So one of the 6 slots went to the 4 Horsemen, one of the slots went to myself, who'd been on the brand for years, and one of the slots was going to go to the current Mattel designer on Masters of the Universe Classics. But that was a slot that kind of changed around a bit. Originally, it had been Terry Higuchi, and then it was changed to Bill Beneke, who worked on the line for a while. Now, this was before Ruben came and worked on the line. He was too busy building his giant out-of-control beard at the time. So Terry was rotated back onto the brand, and he became the designer of the day. And since he was on the brand at the time, he was the one who got to get a slot and create a character. Now, Terry grew up in Hawaii, which is very, very different from growing up in England. And he was exposed to a lot of properties from Japan, both in the toys that he played with as a kid and the entertainment that he watched. This was a big part of his childhood. And so things like Henson's cyborg figures with see-through chests were a big part of, the way he played, and the entertainment that he was watching, like Kikaido, were essentially what spurred his imagination and what left very much everlasting images and concepts into his burgeoning creative mind, shall we say, because he obviously grew up to be a toy designer. And the things that you are into as a child very much inspire you, and when you are designing toys, a lot of times it's going to be based on what you grew up with. In particular, the belt buckles that were on some of the characters from one of his favorite shows was something he never forgot, and this was part of what showed up in in his design for his character. He also really liked a character named Hasami Jaguar, or Scissorhands Jaguar, or Jaguar with Scissorhands. I'm bad at translating Japanese. But again, you can see how the characters that he really liked showed up in his design. There was also one of his favorite movies of all time was Space Hunter Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, which I must admit I'd never seen. I probably should check it out. So in particular, the villain from this had giant kind of scissor hands. So again, big influence on how he created the character CyChop for Masters of the Universe Classics. The influence from his favorite movies, his favorite toys, his favorite TV shows growing up, all sort of, solidified into a brand new character in Masters of the Universe. His original idea was to call the character Sizor, and this was on the B sheet and in all of our internal paperwork for a long time until we realized it was a Pokemon character and we couldn't get the copyright. So the name was changed to CyChop, which I want to say I came up with that. I gave him like a list of other names and he chose, because he was like, well, I can't have Sizor, you come up with the name. I could be wrong in that memory, but either way, he definitely approved of the name when he couldn't get the name that he wanted as his number one. And this was basically a character who, like Edward Scissorhands, has gigantic metal clamping scissors for hands. Why have I not used a picture of clamps from Futurama in this video? I don't know. Okay, besides the point. So, his main action feature, and a lot of the new characters created for the 30th anniversary line were sort of thought of as what would their action figure have been in the vintage line, and obviously he would have had opening and closing giant scissor hands. Although, clearly safe for children. There were no sharp edges. It just gave the perception that they were scissors, but everything was, safe to the touch, and it was never, of course, going to harm anyone. And it did have that universal plug that if you wanted to pull off the scissor arms and plug in things like Roboto parts or Spector parts or Trapjaw parts or Hurricane Hordak parts, that was really big and very important in the line that everything was interchangeable. So if you wanted to pop on, say, Horde Prime's hands to him, you could do that and just give him regular hands. Although Terry just kind of wanted him to have the scissor hands. His idea was like, no, these aren't interchangeable as far as who the character is, but hey, MOTU Classics was all about customization, and again, why we made sure all the plugs were interchangeable. And I think when fans first saw him at San Diego Comic-Con, along with his concept art by Terry behind him, incidentally, Terry also did the concept art for Mighty Spector, well, he was a little odd, and he had a bit of a humor factor because I think the Japanese influence, unless you grew up with these shows the way Terry did, it was a little off-putting. Not that other characters like Mighty Spector and Sir Laser-Lot weren't off-putting, but, here was a character with giant scissor arms, and what exactly was going to be his role in the He-Man universe? Was he going to be, the barber? Was he going to be the guy who, chopped up, like, food for people? So while some of the other 30th anniversary figures got a lot of, call it fan art, which I tend to see as a sort of emblematic of, well, I guess strong emotions one way or another towards characters, be it love or hate, CyChop tended to not get as much. You would see artwork show up for Dragoman and Sir Laser-Lot and Spector, but CyChop was very limited in the number of sort of secondary fan-created art and imagery, at least that I could find on Google. So he was a member of the Horde, which again was something that Terry wanted to do, and we really, well, at least as brand manager, I tried to let the people who had each slot really carry the day with the origin and the bio and what faction they would be part of. And Terry really liked the idea of CyChop being the former partner of Cronus, of Trapjaw. The idea that they were, partners in crime. And, the whole idea that they were both kind of cyborg-esque figures that had replacement parts. I think that visually really tied them together for him. And he liked that whole backstory. And eventually CyChop became a member of the Evil Horde because, Hordak is always looking to recruit people. Visually, he was very much on, par with MOTU of combining, animal parts and robot parts. He had Beastman arm and legs and Roboto chest and this very cool, anime Japanese-inspired head that was, while very different from previous Masters of the Universe characters, I honestly felt like it looked very much on cue. He could have been a character that sort of had limited screen time in Filmation. I didn't see him, as being non-MOTU at all. He looked very, very similar to other designs. And while he didn't come with his own pair of hands so that he could, actually pick things up or grip them, because Terry really liked the idea that he just had permanent scissor hands, he did have a lot going for him. And one of the things in particular to mention is his belt, because we put this out at San Diego Comic-Con before the figure was revealed. And a lot of people didn't know, how is this related to the Horde? Well, it was kind of related to Horde Prime. So while Horde Prime never showed up in the series outside of being a giant claw hand and a giant sort of shadow energy cloud thing, there was another version of Horde Prime that was in the UK comic books where he had an insectoid head, purple skin, and a really big sort of Fu Manchu mustache, etc., etc. So a lot of fans wanted this version of Horde Prime as well, and they spent a lot of time online sort of dissecting which parts from different classics figures could be used to construct this figure inexpensively. Now, we did include the bug head, if you will, with the Horde Prime figure. but it didn't really work with the existing Horde Prime body because, it wasn't purple and it didn't have all those parts. And fans spent a lot of time plugging this head onto different Masters of the Universe classic bodies to see if they could figure out one that worked. Well, the idea was that if you took Mighty Spector and decapitated him, which I know a lot of fans probably really enjoyed getting the thrill of doing that, you could then take his body and use the belt from CyChop, obviously disregarding Spector's harness, gun, belt, and ammo clip, so taking all of that off, and you could use Spector's body with Horde Prime's cape and the UK insectoid head to more or less make a pretty on again, off again model Horde Prime. While it's not perfect, it's really close, and this was definitely what we had in mind, and I have a permanent collector, or permanent figure, shall we say, in my collection of Horde Prime like this. So, while a figure that was definitely a mixed match of different parts, I felt he was very He-Man, and I think if a lot of us had this figure as a kid, he would have been a huge favorite. And I think just sort of getting him for the first time in the 30th line was a little like, whoa, where'd he come from? But with his giant scissor action figures, I think he would have been huge with kids in the 80s and very, very popular. I still like him today.